Welcome everyone into my kitchen. You'll see all of it in a second. I'm really excited to be sharing with you today. So we'll be doing Sarawak Laksa, and we'll get to that in just a second. I am originally from Borneo, so Sarawak Laksa is very close to my heart because I was born in that area and absolutely loved eating it growing up. But before I get into that, as I mentioned, I am Rash. I started anacquiredchef, which is a little bit of a passion project that I had on the side around just being able to share my knowledge and just also learn from everyone that I share with on my pursuits on all things culinary. So I have social media followings, which if it hasn't already been put into the chat, we'll do that at the end. But feel free to follow me on social media. I love hearing from you guys, whether it's questions, suggestions, anything really, so that I can cater to you guys and share and create more fun stuff. But for today, we're going to get into Sarawak Laksa. So I think everyone's had laksa before. I think that's safe to say. And I'm just going to make that broad assumption. But has anyone ever tried Sarawak Laksa? If you want to go ahead and raise your virtual hand, that would be awesome. So I'm going to quickly share a screen and we can go through the ingredients together. Now, while I do that, I'm just going to also get a pot of water going. So what I've got here on the side, and you'll see more in a second, is just a pot that can fit about 2 liters of water. I'm going to go ahead and get my stock. My stock done. So if you're doing the traditional version, it's going to be that you cook your prawns and your chicken in this 1.5 liters worth of water. Or if you're doing the vegetarian and vegan option, you're going to be doing your mushrooms in here with your vegetable stock. So I'm just going to grab some water and then we'll go through the ingredients together. I've got 1.5 liters that's going in, along with a teaspoon of salt, just to get the temperature up. And then we'll do ingredients together. So we've got to start with at the top, as you can see, hopefully in my screen share, the traditional on the left and the vegan on the right. And these are 2 extremes. So I know some folks are pescatarian, some are vegetarian. You can pick and sort of mix and match depending on what suits you most. But basically, I've given a couple of options. So if you don't eat fish, if you don't eat prawn, and then if you're purely vegetarian or vegan, you can make those options, but they're 1-to-1. So the chicken is for the tofu, the prawn and shrimp for the shiitake mushrooms, and so on and so forth, all the way down. So I'm gonna pause and just check, and shrimp paste is maybe one we can chat about if folks haven't heard of it before. Were there any questions on this?
So do we put in the fish sauce at this point too? And
we're not doing any, so I've just got the pot going with the water. I'll talk through the different ingredients as we prepare it, because we're going to be doing it in batches. We're going to do the broth in one batch, then we're going to blend up the paste and fry that, then we'll add the broth to it. So as we go through it, I'll call things out. But just to answer your question, the fish sauce will go into the blended paste. Cool. If there were no questions on that, I'll just quickly call out that shiitake mushrooms have that umami flavor. That's why they make a good substitute for the prawns or shrimps. And it's got that chewy texture as well, which is why it works so well. But it doesn't have that seafood taste, which is why we add nori. So nori is basically those seaweed sheets that you see wrapped around sushi. That just has a sea taste that adds to the whole laksa broth. Now, if you don't have nori or you prefer to use vegan fish sauce, that's totally fine too. But definitely sort of, I think the nori is going to help if you don't have prawns in the dish. Something to remember for next time in case you don't have it on hand. And that's going to take care not just of the prawn or shrimp, but it's also going to take care of the blanching, which is the shrimp paste. And that's just basically I'll show you later, but it's a block of, actually I'll show you now. It's like this block that's been cut. Hopefully you can see that. But yes, it's just kind of shrimp that's been roasted and dried out, and it's got a lot of umami and seafood flavor in it. But yeah, and we've also got eggs here, and we'll do that separately as an omelet. And I've suggested yuba sheets instead, or bean curd sheets. And I've done this before in Singapore noodles, where you just kind of soak them and then slice them up in shredded cuts, and then you sort of saute it really nicely to get that caramelized feel, and it almost looks like shredded omelet, and it actually tastes pretty good as well. So so that's for the ingredients on those. hopefully that all makes sense. We'll jump into the specialty ingredients and substitutes. So red shallots, brown onions are a good substitute, or banana shallots are even better. They're just less oniony. Galangal or ginger. So they're not the same. And I know, Ploy, when you did your class, you're like, when you make tom kha, you can't actually substitute galangal for ginger because kha means galangal. But in this recipe, you can. And it's mainly because ginger has that sort of peppery taste that galangal does, but galangal just has that lemon kick to it. And because we'll be adding tamarind, that will kind of sort of balance it out a little bit. So that's why we can use either of those. Now, the next one's white sesame seeds. I'm going to be using tahini because I think it just takes a lot of work out of it. You don't have to roast the sesame seed and blend it. Tahini is basically blended roasted sesame seeds. And similarly with peanuts, I'm going to be using peanut butter today, and I'm using the smooth kind instead of actually roasting and browning your own peanuts. And then tamarind, I have tamarind paste instead of a block, and lemongrass. I'll show all of that to you in a second. And finally, candle nut or macadamia nuts if you don't have candle nuts. And I'll just quickly pause. If there were no questions, I'll keep going. Alexis, yuba equals deep fried tofu skin available. Yep. Yes, thank you, Alexis. That's exactly right. You can even get the dried kind, or you can get the fresh kind. The fresh kind's even better. It actually makes for a really good pasta substitute because it's gluten-free and it's vegan. So I've had it with pasta sauce. It's actually not bad. All right, so that's them. And so the spices are pretty much the same across either side. It's either that you grind them up or you have them in powder form. Now, you could use black pepper instead of white pepper if you don't have it, but just very sparingly, because this one, the white pepper, we actually use more for the flavor than the spice. And then the rest of it, I think, are there with alternatives for like aniseed instead of star anise, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that's all good as well. And last but not least, other remaining ingredients. We've got some chili, dried and regular, that's going to go in with garlic. And the rest of the ingredients there, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to just pull up, I'm going to stop sharing screen. I'll talk through these in a second. What I'll quickly do is into my pot that I had going, I've got that water boiling, and I had a teaspoon of salt added to it, and that's 1.5 liters worth of water. The first thing that's going to go in, and I'm doing, again, the traditional version, is prawns. So these are all the shells and the heads that are going to go in, and they're just going to boil in there for about 20 minutes or so. I'm going to bring that water up to a boil, and then I'm actually also going to throw in chicken breast to go in there as well. And that's actually going to be the stock that gets created. And then we'll throw away the shells later on. But we just want to get that boiling first before we throw the chicken in. And so that stock will kind of keep boiling as we chat through these ingredients on the side. So we should be able to...
As well, or just the shells and the heads?
Just the shells and the heads. We will quickly blanch the prawns because I don't want to throw the prawns in. What you'll struggle with is fishing them out. And if you leave them in too long, they'll get rubbery. So that's where your wired sieve will come in handy. You'll put the prawns in, we'll just sort of lower them down in for 3 to 5 minutes and take them right back out and put them to the side. Cool. So we're going to go through the blended paste ingredients while that starts to boil up. So in a blender jug, and I've actually gone ahead and blended my paste already, but I want to make sure I show you how to do it one by one. So we're going to start with the dried chili. So that's soaking in about ½ a cup of boiling water at the time I put it in, and I've left it for 20 minutes, and that's just to soften it and pull out all the oils. So that's the dried chili that I mentioned before. The shallots that I've cut up, so that's probably about 3 shallots altogether, banana shallots or red shallots preferably. And that's all been chopped up and ready to go. And that's just really to help the blender blade. Otherwise it's going to work very hard, and we don't want that. Also going in is the garlic. So that's about 65 grams worth. It's around a head of garlic, basically. A whole head is what that would be. Now comes the fun part. We've got a variety of things here. Hopefully you can see all of them. Put that down. So we've got red chilies up the front. Now those red chilies are basically a very big chili. They're not spicy, unlike the dry chilies, which have a little kick to it. They're just there for the color. We've also got candle nuts. So hopefully you can see that. They look like macadamia nuts, and you can use macadamia nuts as a substitute. They also go in the blender. Now, the thing with candle nuts is they're toxic when raw. So when we cook them, we do need to cook them all the way through. And that's why we do end up frying the spice paste for about half an hour. But they are delicious. They add to the creaminess as well. With the lemongrass, what I've done here, and I won't go into too much detail because I know Ploy did a good job explaining it the other time, but basically that's a whole lemongrass stalk. And I usually just take a third of it. So I'm going, I'll even peel these bits off, and I'm going in to look for where the green starts, which is kind of around there. And then the rest of it gets taken away. And we're only using sort of that part of it. And we'll take off the root, and we'll take off the old sort of leaves on the outside because they're too fibrous. And then we basically pound it, and you can see here, it's pounded to the point where it's hollow in the inside because it makes it easier to slice it up once you've pounded it. And then you can just slice it into rings, and then that goes in the blender as well. What I do, and I think Ploy mentioned this as well last time, is I keep all my lemongrass spares and I put them in the fridge, and when I have enough, I make lemongrass tea. And it actually goes really well with ginger peels as well. So if you're using ginger peels today, don't throw the peels away, put them in with these guys. I know it's getting cold over in the US. It works really well with a bit of honey to make a warm drink, to kind of keep yourself warm as it starts to get cool around you. And in summer, it actually serves well as a cool drink. So you can actually sort of put it in the fridge and get it to a cold temperature, and it's really refreshing as well. So it works for summer and winter. So that's what you can do with those guys. Now, finally, I mentioned ginger. If you don't have ginger, you can use galangal. I just thought I'd quickly show you guys the difference between ginger and galangal, and that's them. So this guy is galangal. So it's looks like ginger, really, except that it's a little bit tougher and a little bit different color. And as I mentioned before, it tastes the same, except that galangal's got a little lemony kick to it and more peppery than ginger. So those are the differences. You can use either, but I thought I'd quickly show you guys in case you hadn't seen galangal before. In its all its glory in its root form. It's so big, but yes. So yeah, and so that would be those ingredients. And then I talked about the belacan before. That's it there again. So it's just shrimp, and you can see it's roasted because it's got some ash in it. So this one comes roasted already. If you have shrimp belacan and it's not roasted, you can just put it directly on the fire to give it a little bit of a sort of a smoky flavor. It really does make it taste quite nice as a consequence. So a little bit of that goes into the blender as well, along with what I mentioned before, which was the onions, the shallots, the garlic, and the dried chili. And in that as well goes a little bit of oil, and that's just to help the blender blade go around. Now, if you're doing the vegan version or the vegetarian version, you'd be putting in the fish sauce into the blender jug. You'd also be putting in the nori sheets into the blender jug, and everything else sits out, and then we'll come back to it later on. So I'll pause there. I've actually already made the paste, as I mentioned. So if you're cooking along, go ahead, grab your blender jug, throw everything in. I'm just conscious of time because I have to answer questions and everything else in between. So I thought I'd do myself a favor. But that's what it looks like once it's been blended. It becomes a paste that's completely sort of pulverized. Be mindful with things like candlenut and ginger. It is going to struggle a little bit. So you do need to kind of add a little bit of oil, preferably instead of water, to help the blender blade along, and you do need a slightly powerful blender. And so if you are going ahead and putting in your lemongrass and your galangal or ginger, you should pound it as much as possible just to break up the fibers and slice it as small as you can before you put it in the blender. Otherwise, your blender motor might go into overdrive, and I say that from experience. So hopefully that's helpful for everyone. But that's the spice paste that you'll end up getting that we're going to fry in a second. I'm just going to go ahead now with this guy in the pot and put the chicken in to cook as well, whilst I take any questions on everything that I just
what you put in the spice paste?
Sure. Yeah. So into the blender it goes the shallots, the garlic, the dried chilies, the fresh chilies, the lemongrass, the ginger or galangal, the candle nuts, and a little bit of oil. Now, if you're doing the vegan version, instead of this shrimp belacan, you would put the nori sheets and also the vegan fish sauce. So that's all that goes into the blender jug.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Were there any other questions?
I think we've been great trying to answer everybody. I reassured Danny that I think the chilies, the Kashmiri chilies will be okay if couldn't find dried. Could you confirm or deny this, Rush?
Yeah, dry chilies are typically, if you buy them in Indian grocers, Danny, they're usually Kashmiri chilies, and those are fine. I think the only other kind is in Indian grocers is Vyapki chilies, but that's what we're looking for is a bit of heat, so you're good either way. But yeah, either's fine. Cool. What I did is I just put the chicken into the broth now to cook the chicken and to create that broth. If you're substituting chicken for tofu, don't do that. Your tofu you want to keep separate, and we'll sear it later on when we do the scrambled eggs for yuba sheets. You just kind of want to slice it into 1/2-inch sheets of firm tofu, and then we'll kind of sear it on either side and then cut them up into cubes. That's what you'll do with the tofu, but the chicken goes in here. So hopefully that that covers that one. And that's going to cook for about 20 minutes so that the chicken breast completely cooks on the inside as well. Michelle, you could use macadamia nuts instead of candle nuts. And yes, Phoenix, you're right. You should soak the candle nuts before going into the blender. Anything that's hard, even lemongrass, for the matter, because there's 1/2 cup of water that goes in with the blender jug just to kind of help the blade rotate. So if you have time and you can soak these things, it's going to pulverize better and become a smoother paste as opposed to it goes in dry. How do you make your lemongrass and ginger tea? Yeah, look, take all those lemongrass sort of cuttings and ginger peels, throw that into a big pot of water. So I would say if you have like 2 worth of lemongrass stalks and a handful of ginger peels, probably 2 liters of water would be good. So what's that in ounces? I'm not sure. But a decent amount of water. I bring it to the boil for at least 30 minutes, rolling boil. Then I drop it down for, to simmer for up to an hour. And then, the color will change and you'll know that it's sort of cooked all the way through. It's sort of extracted out all the flavor from the lemongrass and the ginger peels. I even sometimes add pandan leaves. So if you have spare pandan leaves lying around the house and you don't know what to do with them, they go in great. They add sweetness, whereas ginger is spice and lemongrass is refreshing. Yeah, and it goes really all well together. And then, yeah, boil for up to an hour, and then it's ready to serve with honey or rock sugar or on its own, or you can serve it cold as well, as I mentioned. So hopefully that answers that, Michelle. Yes, Danny, I do add the water in because it does need a little bit of help. Typically, you try to avoid adding water to chili paste because it just makes it longer to cook, and you do need all that water to evaporate out, but we will be frying the spice paste for about at least 30 minutes. So that water will come right out because we do need it to blend everything through. So hopefully that all makes sense. I'm going to quickly go through these ingredients now on the left-hand side, and then we can switch over to starting to cook the paste. So that paste is ready to go. That paste is going to be cooked with the peanut butter that I mentioned, and it's also going to be cooked with the tahini. Now, again, alternatively, you could have used roasted sesame seeds or roasted peanuts together. And the other thing that's going to go in is the tamarind. So that hasn't yet been added to anything. That's going to go into the spice paste when we cook it. Finally, we have the spices itself. So I'm going to quickly go through these. So we've got here a big bowl in the middle of coriander. Coriander is the main event for this particular laksa. There's lots and lots and lots of coriander. I think that's about 1/4 cup's worth of whole coriander. Now you could use the fresh coriander stems and take out 1.5 tablespoons of coriander, whole seeds, because then that gives a nice sort of freshness to it rather than just the coriander flavor. So it's something you can do. You don't want to throw your coriander stems away. It's a great way to, reduce waste and also avoid composting all the parts of the things that you don't use, blend it in, and it's really cool. I do that a lot with Indian curries as well. So that's the coriander. That's the white pepper that I mentioned before. So that's just pepper grounds, but white in color. Again, you would halve that for black pepper. Next up, we've got the cumin seeds. So this is regular cumin, the kinds that you'd use with Mexican cooking. And that's just 1.25 tablespoons worth. And finally, on the front, you've got 2 star anise, 2 cloves, 4 cardamom pods. Now you do want to take the seeds out of the pods and discard the pods. You don't want the pods being blended in to a powder paste. And then in the middle here, I've got just half a nutmeg that I've been able to crack with a mortar and with a pestle. And so I've ground that all up into a spice. Now you can go ahead and just use powdered spices if you don't have a spice grinder and don't want to go through the hassle of it. And I've given you sort of the measurements to sub out for ground to whole spices, but I've already gone ahead and blended that spice up. So if you are blending it, go ahead, throw all of that into your spice blender or coffee blender, and then just whiz it up until it's kind of in this sort of a foam. So it's really all powdered up. If you haven't yet toasted your spices, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. It adds a little smoky flavor if you do it, because it just kind of brings out the oils, but we will be frying it in oil. So it's okay if you didn't actually fry it in whole spice form. Sandra, I did in mine that the nutmeg made it through. It actually went all the way through. Now, if you don't have such a powerful spice grinder, you might want to pound it up a little bit more before you throw it in, but mine was successful. But it's the same thing with the spice paste as well, as suggested earlier, and it's a great idea. Sometimes it's better to actually soak stuff in water. With these guys, pound it up because it's dry. Cool. Okay, so I think I'm going to move this pot over to the other stove so we can get the spice paste going now that we've got all our ingredients in front of us. Were there any other questions on that sort of part of the cooking? So I'm just going to, so just to be clear, I've got the broth that's going that I'm going to move over to there. And I'm going to get the wok going with the spice paste to fry that up, because that takes a little while to cook as well. Awesome. That's fantastic. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. Let me know if I am, and I'll slow it down and answer questions as well if there are any. But yes, that's on a high heat now, all the way up. And I want to get that heat high because I'm about to put half a cup of oil, peanut oil I'm using. You can use just any vegetable oil, but I quite like peanut oil because it goes with the peanuts that goes into Sarawak Laksa. Get that sort of to a high heat. You'll start to see little bubbles appear on it, and then drop the heat down to medium high and drop the paste in. And then it's a slow cook of the paste to, and I'll walk through sort of why it takes so long to actually cook it. There's a few reasons for it, but half a cup of peanut oil goes in. Great. And we'll let that heat up. And we'll be putting in first the paste. It'll take a good 20 minutes to cook, and we'll kind of keep an eye on it. And I'll talk through what we're looking for as we cook it down. Then we'll drop the heat a little bit more and do the powder ground spices. And then after that, we'll go in almost on a reduced or completely switched off heat with the peanut butter and sesame seed, because that'll burn or scald if you have it on a high heat. So it goes in at the very end and at a low heat. And I should have mentioned the tamarind goes in at the beginning with the spice paste, so that goes in together. But yeah, so the oil is coming to a heat. Now, I haven't forgotten about my broth. It's sitting on the side. If water happens to evaporate like it starts to reduce and you see that there's a ring around the top of your pot, you might want to add just a little bit back in. But what you want to make sure is that it has a chance to completely cook for the chicken to cook before it removes the, sorry, just give me 1 second. My lovely cat has decided to come into the kitchen, and it's not the best place for him to be in right now. Bear with me just a second.
No problem. I'm going to take a look. Ruby and I are going to see how everyone's doing. Any urgent questions or concerns? Let us know.
We always love seeing some animal friends on a cooking night, but yeah, definitely not necessarily if they're getting too much into the kitchen. We definitely don't want that. But as a watching buddy, that's always awesome.
They are fans of laksa, I'll tell you that. Especially with the prawn broth in there, they will come looking for it, which is why he's managed to creak open the door. But that's fine. We might have him pop up at the end once everything's done. But yes, sorry, I interrupted. Were there any other questions? while you guys were chatting, that is.
Can you say, besides the blended paste, what are the other things we are adding now in the pan?
Yeah, sure. So we've got that blended paste, which is this guy that I'm holding. We're going to go in with that first and salt, followed by the tamarind paste. Then we'll let that cook first for about 20 minutes, and I'll talk through that. Then goes the powdered paste, not for very long, to at the end. And finally, the peanuts or peanut butter and sesame seeds or tahini. And that's all that kind of gets cooked in this sort of phase of the recipe.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. All right, this oil is ready to jump. So we're gonna go in. Now it's gonna get noisy here, so bear with me. But we're going in with all the spice paste first. And yeah, and a half a tablespoon of salt. So that's 2 teaspoons, half tablespoon. And the reason I'm going in with it right now is because I'm about to stir it in. And what I want is to make sure that when all those ingredients are sort of hitting the heat and their pores are opening up is when I want the salt to go in. And that's really important when you cook with this sort of a spice paste blend. You want everything to kind of, 1, you want it to come together, 2, you want it to get to know each other, and 3, you want it to be properly flavored. So you don't want to be adding salt at the end to see whether it tastes salty. You want to be adding salt at the beginning to intensify the flavors of the things that you're frying, if that makes sense. But yeah, so that's going to get fried down for about 20 minutes. Sorry, was there a question?
Did we take off the broth from the fire?
No, I've actually just moved it because I've only got one stove here. So that's continuing to cook.
Okay,
You're welcome.
thanks.
All good. And that's just on a simmer. So it doesn't have to be on a high heat. You just want the chicken to cook. Yes, so we're going to fry this down, and over time, we're going to see this change color. So a couple of things going to happen. One is all that water that was sizzling up at the beginning will start to evaporate out. That's the first thing that'll happen. The second thing is that that oil, that copious amount of oil that went in, is going to now go and commingle and get in between all the crevices of the paste. That's what we want, so that the oil properly fries everything. Coming back to that candle nut before, we can't have toxicness in our food. So we want to make sure that's cooked all the way down. We also want to make sure everything else cooks. So garlic, onion, everything else that went in needs to be cooked down. And like any curry paste, be it Indian, Thai, Malaysian, what have you, you do need for the color to change. That's part of it. When the color changes, you know that it's caramelized and cooked down. It means that the paste will last longer. Your food will last longer because things won't go rancid easily because all that water and all that other stuff's cooked properly. And finally, what we'll be looking for in addition to the color is just oil starting to separate from it. So this is going to take a while to cook. And so we're going to have a bit of a chat while we do it. But yes, constantly stirring ever so slightly, like not too much. I'm doing it now because I'm about to put the tamarind in. So I put the salt in before now goes the tamarind, because I want that to get in there nice and early, that sweetness and tanginess of tamarind.
Sorry, how much tamarind paste? I have tamarind paste like you do.
Yeah, so just about a tablespoon should do it. And so we're going to leave these guys to the side to add as this fries. So I'm bringing the heat now that it's bubbling up like that, just slightly to medium heat so that it doesn't burn, but starts to cook slowly. And we're just going to let that cook over time. And let's see. Yeah, and that's going to just cook while we chat. I'm just going to go off frame to look at the broth and be back in a second. Yep, that's going fine. Smells really good in here. Yeah, so we're just going to have to be patient a little bit. So typically Sarawak Laksa paste, you can actually buy it in a packet. The best kinds are the ones that you get in Sarawak, which is why I made an effort to figure out what goes into the paste and to try and recreate it. So as we cook this down, you'll start to notice that the color of this paste will start to be very similar to the color of the paste that you can buy in the packets. And that's just because, you know, ultimately that's what they end up doing. They make a copious amount of paste and they mass cook it, and then they package it up with lots of, unfortunately, lots of preservative and other things, which you get the benefit of excluding from this particular recipe if you make it yourself at home. Yeah.
I have a question. How do you tell if the color is changing? Because after I added the tamarind, it all looks much darker than yours.
Oh, it's going to get a lot darker. It's going to go almost dark maroon is what will end up at the end. And that'll be after we add the spice paste as well, but the color will start to get really rich, just as a consequence of frying it like this for about 20 to 30 minutes. And again, that's on the heat. So if you have a higher heat, it may cook faster, but I have it on a medium high heat because I don't want to burn it, as I mentioned. And it's just going to be one of those things that we get going with patience, as I mentioned. What I might do while we are patient with that is just talk through some of the other ingredients that are going to go into the dish. So you can hopefully see on the camera above me, this is vermicelli noodles. Now, this is not the vermicelli noodles that I used for Singapore noodles, if you were in that class. This is a slightly different kind. So vermicelli noodles are actually rice vermicelli noodles, first of all, because there is mung bean vermicelli noodles, which is the original vermicelli, they say. So we're not looking at mung bean versions, we're looking at rice versions. And we're not looking at the Vietnamese versions that you have with the salad and meat. We're looking at the type that you have that is actually dry and ready to blanch. So it looks something like this. Whoop, that's better. Hopefully you guys can see that. So that's the rice vermicelli that I would recommend using that's highly available. The one that's sitting over here isn't that. This is just rice and water. That's how they make it. The one that I'm actually using is has a little bit of potato starch and cornstarch and sago starch in it. So it's actually laksa vermicelli. So you'll see that it's a little bit longer and it's a little bit thicker than regular type of vermicelli. And that's probably why it goes better with laksa, because it's a little bit heartier. It's got a little bit more hold, as opposed to rice vermicelli, which is slightly thinner and can break when you eat it. Because laksa has a thicker soup, and you want to it kind of needs to hang on to the soup without kind of losing its structural integrity. So that's why if you can get a hold of it, great. If you can't, rice vermicelli is fine. Just don't, with the rice vermicelli, don't soak it or cook it for too long, because then it becomes really soft and it starts to break into pieces. You want it to at least hold its form. So when you make the rice vermicelli like this, I've given instructions on how to do it. Soak it in water and then add a little boiling water up to 7 minutes. You don't want to leave it in for very long, because what happens again is it starts to get soggy. So you want it to still have sort of that wiry almost texture when you've actually finished blanching it. And then the soup, the laksa soup, will take care of it. So the broth will actually rehydrate the rest of it as you eat it. And that also adds to the flavor of the noodles. So that's one other thing that we'll be adding to the dish towards the end that you should have ready to go. The other thing that we'll be adding is the cucumber. So I'm just going to quickly show you while this cooks down. This is cucumber that I've taken baby cucumbers and I've just used a teaspoon and I've taken out the seeds in the middle. And then I've just sliced it up into little sort of bite-sized shredded pieces. So that's just going to go on top of the noodles as a garnish. And so that's the cucumber. We will also be blanching some bean sprouts. That'll go on top as well with the cucumber. And finally, the shredded egg, which we'll cook up in a second. That goes on top as well, or shredded bean curd sheets. So those are some of the things that'll go on top. So yeah, That's just going to take a little longer to cook. Might actually quickly walk through while that cooks some of the condiments that'll go on top of the laksa. Sorry, the condiments that you will have with the laksa for that to cook. So typically we serve laksa with calamansi lime, which is a lime that's smaller and is actually yellow in color on the inside. I've also seen it served with kumquat. Those are the traditional ways to have limes that's served on the side with a little bit of sambal to go with it. Now, I don't, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning, sambal is not something that we're going to have a chance to get to make today, but I have actually already created a video on YouTube that you can go and watch me make it. This version that I have here is actually a vegan version. So I've actually made it with the similar things that went into the spice base, like nori and a couple of other things. So that actually takes care of the condiment that you have laksa with. It's similar to the spice paste, except it's sweeter. So it has a little bit of sugar in it. So the sugar in the sambal with a little bit of spice, plus the lime, the sourness, starts to become something that allows you to play around with how you actually enjoy the dish. So some people like it really spicy. They'll actually add more chili to it like this. So they'll throw that on top. And some just want to have it with sambal and lime, but always coriander leaves on top. So that'll also be something that we put on top of the dish at the end. But that's what you end up having the dish with. So there's the noodles, then there's the sort of the protein, if you like, then the broth, the toppings I just mentioned, and now the garnish or condiments that it goes with. So as you can see, this still has a little bit of water in it because that's most of the water. I call them water bubbles. But when water hits oil, it usually starts to get fizzly. That's still happening. That means not all that water has come out yet. We want to wait for that to happen, and then we'll start to see the color of the paste start to turn darker. What I might actually do, just while we're doing that, is swap it out. So I'm going to bring the prawn chicken broth back here and add a little bit of water to it so that we can quickly blanch the prawns. And that way we get to multitask up in this kitchen today. I'm going to throw some water in there because it has reduced, as I mentioned it would. And let that come back up to the boil. And then I'm going to remove the chicken in the middle and put it into a plate. So what we do with the chicken typically is we don't actually leave it in the soup. We take it out and we will shred it up in a piece, in a plate with 2 forks. And that just becomes another topping that goes, the part of the protein toppings that go into the on top of the laksa bowl. So we'll wait for that to come to a boil, and then we're just going to use our wire strainer to actually poach the prawns without throwing it in there. Just going to cover that up so it comes to a boil faster. Yeah, so we're going to, depending on how hot the water is, 3 to 5 minutes, just kind of a blanch. Will start to turn pink, and that's when you know they're done, so that they stay succulent and don't turn rubbery. And then we kind of set them aside as well, and then we'll use it later on for garnishing. So those of you that are cooking along, how are you guys going?
My paste dried up a long time ago.
Oh, it did? That's fantastic. Well, if it has dried up, then you can go ahead and add the spice powder, because that means it's ready for that to be added in, and that's gonna turn it darker again. But are you starting to see some oil separate around the corners?
Yes.
Perfect. That's exactly the right time to throw the spices in, because those oils will get cooked. Sorry, the spices will get cooked in that oil. And once that's fully incorporated and you can start to smell those spices come through your nose, that'll be the right time to go ahead and reduce the fire almost down to completely switched off, and add the sesame and peanut butter and just stir it in as well, if that's what you're using. Cool. Can you make extra paste and freeze that? Absolutely, Danny. In fact, that's what I'd recommend doing, because there's a lot of work that goes into acquiring all the ingredients and preparing them. I would actually recommend frying it up and then storing it in little compartments. So you probably need about, what was it, about a cup and a bit, or just a cup-ish for today's recipe. And so you can freeze it in cup sizes, so you know that you'll make about enough for 2 to 3 people to eat, depending on how hungry you are. And then you can defrost them as well. But yeah, you would fry them before freezing them. So once we're done with today's paste, with everything else in there, that's the point at which you could just go ahead and freeze it. But we'll continue cooking today. So we're just gonna go ahead and throw the broth into that paste and keep cooking it all the way through. Interesting. I think, so what I do, Sandra, is I actually have in my freezer all the time either an Indian curry paste, a very basic one, and a Thai curry paste. And so this one, I'd say if you want to just make the paste and you're not sure if you want to kind of use it for Sarawak Laksa specifically, I may omit the things on my right here, in front of me here. So the spice paste, unless you absolutely like the spice paste, go ahead and fry it in with what you added into the blender. I would take out the peanut butter and the sesame seeds because that makes it very unique to this particular dish. So you can always defrost and refry it. If you decide that you want to use it to make Sarawak Laksa, you can add the peanut butter and tahini. But on its own, even without the powdered paste, again, personal preference, you could use it for other dishes. You could use it to make other types of laksa. You could use it to make a curry, right? You could even use it for a stir fry. I'll tell you what, my partner loves, he's a carnivore, he loves meatloaf. And so the other day I came up with a Thai meatloaf where I took a Thai curry paste, which was made up of lemongrass, onion, ginger, garlic, kaffir lime leaves. And instead of what you would typically add to meatloaf, I added that in, and oats and meat and a couple eggs and some breadcrumbs on top, and we had a Thai flavored meatloaf. So you can get creative with those pastes if you really like the curry paste. And you can do all types of things with it. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. You're welcome, Sandra. All right, I'm taking the chicken out, and I'm just gonna let it cool for a second, and then we'll be able to shred it up later on. There we go. Now into this, I'm going to just lower in like that, as you can see, and create some room for the prawns to cook. So I'm just going in with the prawns for about, again, 3 to 5 minutes, not very long. I'll do them in half batches just so that there's enough room for them to cook properly. And you'll start to see them cook pretty fast, which is why you don't want to throw them in there and you'll struggle to fish them out. And by then it'll probably be unsalvageable. Now, I've read a lot of tips online around how to make your prawns more succulent. There's a combination of adding sugar, salt, and baking soda to them to make them extra crunchy and sweet. I haven't done that today because these prawns are pretty fresh. But if you are struggling with some sad looking prawns and you kind of want to salvage them, you can always just throw in what I mentioned before, like a little bit of salt, a little bit of baking soda, and a little bit of sugar. Just leave it to marinate for a couple of minutes before you actually either fry them or blanch them. All right, these are almost done. And then I'm going to take them out. Yep. I'll be back in a tick. All right, my paste is ready. So I'm just going to switch off the heat on that so it doesn't burn. I'll bring it back here and we'll add everything else in. I think these guys are good. Yeah. So as you can see, they've kind of just cooked all the way through. They may be even still slightly pink because even when I take them out, they're still gonna be cooking because they've still got heat on them. So less is more. And we will let them sit to the side and do the second batch. But I'll wait for the water to come back up to a boil so it's a quick cook as opposed to a slow cook. So I'm just gonna cover that back up and bring it to a boil, and we'll do that again.
I love seeing the steam come off your pot to the camera. It's nice.
Very appetizing and feels very homely, doesn't it?
Yes, where I am right now, it's very rainy, and so this is quite comforting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is one of those comfort foods. So that water is coming to a boil again. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the rest of the prawns in.
What did you recommend again? We just want to confirm to perk up the prawns. Salt,
Yep.
baking soda, sugar?
That's it. Those three things. They're the trifecta to perk up your prawns if they're not looking great. I wouldn't be able to tell you in exact measurements. Exactly, it would depend on how many prawns you have, but I go in with like a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of sugar, like those sort of ratios. And then depending on how much prawns you've got, just kind of sort of adjust them accordingly. All right, these are almost done. And that paste is done as well. I just don't want to add anything else to it until I'm back in front of the camera. So I'll show you what it looks like. And then we will bring it to a close and then throw this, once we put these things into the paste, we can start to add the broth in, and we can be starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think it was Ben and a few others that were cooking along as well. I haven't heard from you guys. I'm guessing things are going well, but do shout out if they're not. Yep, those are ready to go. But yeah, do shout out if they're not, so we can talk through anything that we need to.
They're going well. Did you just say we're adding some of the broth into the shrimp paste, or into the paste of stuff?
That's exactly right. So typically you could make the paste and freeze it, but because we're going to go ahead and use it today, we'll use the pot or the wok that you're cooking the spice paste in to basically make the broth, the laksa broth itself. So we're just going to go ahead and add the soup that's been cooking with the prawns and the chicken, or if it's vegetable for you, we'll be tipping the broth into the spice paste and using that to make the laksa broth.
Do we add the peanuts and the sesame paste to after you took it off the stove, you just added both of them?
Yeah, so I'll do that now, actually. I'm going to bring it
Okay.
back. So I've fried up the paste. So we're going to do I think you added the powder already from memory. So now we're going to go ahead and do the peanut butter and the sesame oil as well. So we'll do that together. So I'm just going to bring this guy back up. So as you can see, the oil separated on this guy. He's cooked all the way down. The color has changed. And we're just going to bring that back up to a heat and throw in the spices first. So yeah, the spices go in first. And if you have already put your spices in and that's ready to go, then we'll go ahead and put the peanut butter and sesame seeds. But yes, we're just letting that come to a heat. But that's what you'll end up seeing whenever you cook a spice paste. You start to see the oil separate away from it. That's when you know it's completely cooked. And as I mentioned before, the 3 tests, oil separating, the color of it, and also the fragrance of it. So you'll start to learn to smell, okay, it still smells a little bit raw onion, raw garlic, raw anything. We don't want that. We want it cooked all the way down. So that's coming back up to, yeah.
Did you use the entire thing that was on the stove, or did you say take some out and only use a cup?
But for today's recipe, if you followed it, that's exactly the right amount. So this should be a cup of paste, roughly. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so that oil's coming back up to a heat. So I'm good to throw in my powdered ingredients. So that's all gonna coat in and become a nice dark color. Get all of that in. And just kind of mesh it with the back of the spatula just to make sure that it kind of integrates well with the spice paste as opposed to just kind of clumping in there. And I'm keeping it on a high heat because I do want to toast the spices as well in the oil that's sort of separating out from this the blended paste. And once that starts to smell aromatic, then it's good to go with the peanut butter and the tahini in this case. I'll give it a few minutes to warm up, and then we can get ready to throw the broth in. So I've got my 2 trusty forks for my chicken, and you can see chicken breasts typically have fibers in them. And what I'm going to do firstly is get a plate. So I have a towel, so I have some leverage, and the plate doesn't keep slipping. But yes, I'm just going to go ahead and shred it while that paste cooks up. So it should hopefully separate out pretty easily. famous last words. There we go. So it starts to kind of pull apart. And you just kind of go with the grains and just path of least resistance. Just allow that to start to pull out slightly. And that'll work quite nicely as a little bit of chicken meat to go on top. There we go. Just gonna give this a quick stir. That's looking really nice, smelling amazing too. So that's starting to look like the color of Sarawak Laksa paste if you were to buy it from a store in one of those prepackaged packets. So just a little bit more, I think, and then we should be good to throw the pastes in. Give me just enough time to get going with my chicken again. And whoop.
So are you shredding the chicken with your knife?
That's right.
Your fork?
With 2 forks.
Nice.
Yeah. Another really quick way I learned recently is to just throw it into, if you've got a KitchenAid stand mixer, all you do is you throw cooked chicken in there and you let the paddle rotate and it'll do the shredding for you. But because we don't have a lot of chicken today, figured I'd just do it by hand, old school. But that's a really quick way if you've got like roast chicken and you want to make salads or kind of want to have it shredded up so you can throw into pastas and make sandwiches. Really smart way to do that.
I did recently try that feature.
Oh yeah? How'd it go?
It was really, really cool.
Yeah?
I used it for enchiladas.
Ooh, yeah, because it's the pulled effect, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It
That'd
just
be great.
like, I don't know about all of you, but sometimes you get tired of eating the like same consistency of food. So I wanted to change it up. It looks like iPhone has raised their hands.
Yeah.
Did you have a question? I don't know who it is, so I'm gonna lower the hand or invite you to unmute or type your question in the chat.
Yeah, go for it.
Unclear. Okay, I'm gonna lower the hand.
It's all right, we'll give them a minute to organize themselves. But yes, go ahead.
Can I show my paste and you tell me if it looks kind of, although if it doesn't, I don't have any choice, but
Yeah.
can we show it?
Well, I'm sure it's fine, but let's take a look.
Okay.
Did you want to, should
Yeah,
I stop
putting it.
sharing screen?
Yeah,
for a
if
sec?
you
Oh, that's lovely. Esther, that looks great.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so have you already added everything to it?
Yes.
Okay, that's ready to go. So do you have your broth on standby?
Yes.
Okay,
I'll
so
wait for you. I was feeling overwhelmed thinking I'm behind, but now I'm okay.
that's all good. You're ahead of the game. Look at you, you're a pro. No, so we're good. So we're just about to, that paste is almost done now. I'm gonna go ahead and throw in my peanut butter and then just kind of get the broth ready to go in as well. So I'll finish that up. Going in with the peanut butter and that's just all the peanut butter. And I've dropped the heat down because I don't want this to get burnt. And I'm putting it specifically on top of the paste, not on the heat directly because it will burn. It's very delicate and creamy. Same goes for the sesame seed or tahini. I love tahini. I think it's such a wonderful ingredient. It's funny how sesame seed has its influence going all the way to China and right back to the Middle East. It's just such a versatile and fun ingredient. So yeah, it's great to be able to use it in this recipe too. So that's just going to get a nice solid stir. Again, on a very low heat. And that's just all that creaminess starting to blend in with the paste. And then we're going to go ahead and get ready to throw in our stock. So just with the stock, as you're pouring it in, particularly if you're cooking along today, you'll notice that the stock is a little bit grainy, just by nature of all the peanuts and sesame seed and other things that are in there. So what I typically like to do is go in with a couple of ladles first of stock to just kind of sort of dilute it a little bit. And then once it's actually diluted all the way through, then I add everything else. And that's just to avoid there being clumps of spice paste that kind of float through the broth. That's just not cool. That's not what we want. So that's kind of how I deal with it. And that just kind of brings it together quite nicely. Yeah, so I'm going to grab the soup pot and just bring it in here for a second. So I'm going to do it the lazy man's or lazy woman's way. I'm just going to use my wire strainer and pour a little bit in, as opposed to trying to take out all the prawn shells in there, because that's a lot of work. And that should be fine for me to start doing that. So I am going to keep the heat low, add the broth in, and then stir a little bit and kind of keep going like that. So here we go. So I've just dropped some in. That was probably a cup's worth, no more. And I'm just going to pull the heat back up and just stir it in, and it should become a really nice, thick paste. And then I'll keep adding a little bit more until it's all in there. And that's the reason we don't use coconut cream for this dish. We use coconut milk because it's actually quite rich already. And we want an agent that's a bit more of a diluting nature as opposed to a thickening nature. All right. Yeah, so that heat is jumping out over here, and I have no splatter guard because I'm on the top of my kitchen island. But yes, I've just switched off the heat so you can see it as it comes to a still without the smoke hovering over it. There we go. But you can see that it's starting to thicken like a paste. And so I'm going to go ahead and add now the rest of the stock. And all those wonderful prawn bits can go into compost, or as they say, put it next to your tree and it will grow really fast, because it always does. So if you have any plants that are in dire need of a wake-up call, prawn remains usually do the trick. So now that's just going to slowly stir. Now here's a trick with the stock. Just for the purposes of today's class, I did 20 minutes. You can do up to 2 hours on the stock, and you can do up to 2 hours on the laksa broth as well, even this guy, that is. And the reason for that is because the longer you cook it, the more complex the flavors get. And you can also eat laksa the next day. It tastes better because it gives it the chance. And that's not to say you can't eat it on the day you cook it. It's kind of hard not to, because it does smell delicious. But it will start to intensify as the days go by. So what you'd like to do is maybe keep a little bit to try the next day, and then do a bit of a test. Be like, oh, maybe yesterday's one was not as good as today's one. It's probably because it had a chance to get a little bit more, I call it the spices kind of hanging out and getting to know each other better, and then they get along more harmoniously. But yeah, so we're going to bring that up to a boil first, and then we're just going to let it simmer for a little while. And then we are going to almost be ready to do everything else with regards to the putting together the laksa, that is. We're just going to do 2 more things. We're going to blanch the bean sprouts, and we are going to make scrambled eggs. I'm going to get some of this chicken into a container so that we can use it for toppings later on. And then, so you can see that laksa, it's like this beautiful golden color with a ring of oil on the top, and that's iconically Sarawak Laksa. Well, it's almost any laksa, but this particular laksa is a little darker in color because of all the spices that go into it. Most laksas don't have that much spice that goes into it. Some amount, yes, but not that much. So that's where the darkness comes from, and you start to see that oil pop up at the top. And so we're just going to let that simmer. Now, if you were doing the vegan version, your mushrooms should be floating in there, along with anything else you might have wanted to add. I also did suggest as an option to add a little bit of bok choy or pak choy, however you pronounce it. And that works really well in terms of it being another sort of green color to throw on top. Yes, I haven't added the coconut milk yet. So that goes into the very end with sugar. because we don't want to cook the coconut milk. We just kind of want to have it to add to the paste. So we're going to let this sort of simmer for a little while. I'm going to take him to my trusty stove, and we can then go ahead and do the scrambled eggs and the bean sprouts really quickly. And then we should be ready to plate. I'll do the egg first while I get some water boiling for the bean sprouts. And then we can do that really quickly, and then we should be all set.
Check it in. How's everyone doing? Who might be
Good idea.
Any questions?
Sarawak laksa is different. Another laksa ingredient is tahini and peanut paste. Yes, so Midori, that's what makes Sarawak laksa. It's the sesame seed and the peanut paste. I haven't seen any other laksa. I won't say exclusively. I'm sure there's maybe one or two out there, but for the larger part, most laksas will not include peanut and sesame seed. That's what makes it Sarawak laksa. So yeah, I'm just going to pop this guy over there to simmer so we can get going with the eggs or the bean curd sheets, depending on which one you're making. A little bit of oil. Now, the last time I showed you guys how to do eggs, I added fish sauce because it was Singapore noodles. You're more than welcome to do that again, just like half a teaspoon's worth of fish sauce if you want instead of salt. And gives that nice umami flavor. You don't have to. You can just add salt because it's really going as a topping on top of the laksa. And yeah, it's a great way to just kind of make it, I don't know, pop a little bit because eggs are just so ordinary sometimes. Yeah, candle nuts you'll find in most Asian grocers, Oriental grocers, some of them, Indian grocers, not always. So I would say they're more Southeast Asian, although I know that they're used in some Indian cooking as well. But I've typically found them in Asian grocers. Cool. I think this guy is ready to go. So I want a really thin omelet. I don't want it to be really thick. That's why I'm only doing 2 eggs. So if you want to do more eggs, I would do them twice so that you get that thin consistency. Otherwise, you end up with a really thick omelet. And that's not bad. If you like chewy omelets, that's cool. But I think for this particular dish, we really want it to be super thin because it's nice when you shred it up and it's thin. Now, I haven't added fish sauce to this. So I'm just going to go in with a pinch of salt. And we're going to just let that come to a complete heat and let that top part come completely dry. Now, this is also what makes it Sarawak laksa. Typically, laksas are served with hard-boiled eggs. Not all of them, most of them. But Sarawak laksa specifically is served with shredded omelet. Just making sure it's not sticking to the edges and then just giving it a chance to harden up.
How did the shredded omelet become popular in the cuisine?
In Sarawak laksa specifically?
Yeah.
I'm actually not sure. I mean, it's used a lot, like in Singapore noodles as well. I don't know. It's a good question, Julia.
Sorry to put you on the spot. Or
No,
just in
it's fine.
general, it's so interesting. I grew up eating so many different varieties of Asian cuisine, but it wasn't until many years later that I realized how popular egg was. And maybe I just had very Americanized foods. Like it was only in fried rice, for example, which is so very Americanized. But then I discovered like boiled egg in Asian foods, and it was like a love affair from there.
Well, you raise a good point, because nasi lemak, which is Malaysia, well, they call it nasi uduk in Indonesia, which is a variant of nasi lemak, but we love our eggs. You're right. Like it's front and center all the time. If we have anything to do with it, we're always eating eggs. And I think it's just part of it being an option to do something that's vegetarian, or rather that's well, it's I forget the term now. It's octo-vegetarians, those that eat eggs but don't eat meat products. So there's a lot of folks. Well, I guess in Malaysia, firstly, there's just so many different types of backgrounds in terms of culture. There'll be people who don't eat eggs, but they'll eat everything else. There'll be people who don't eat everything else, but they will eat eggs. And somehow it becomes one of those things that pops up everywhere because it's a safe protein. Because, you know, in Malaysia, with the Muslim population, there is a lack of pork consumption. And then also certain parts of Malaysia where it's not near the water, there's less fish and prawns and things like that. So egg becomes a really good substitute for protein instead of just salads and things like that if you don't eat it. So yeah, maybe that's why. I don't know. That's my theory. But yes, we had it in Singapore noodles. We were having it today. Even when I did a curry laksa class, half-boiled eggs, as I mentioned, nasi lemak always has them. We even do son-in-law eggs, which I think it's from China, but it's where you take hard-boiled eggs and you kind of fry them, and then you slice them in half and serve them with some toppings. And like in Indian households, egg curry is huge. Like boiled eggs thrown into curry with potatoes, so delicious. It's great when you have eggs that you want to get rid of, and it's like making banana cake, but egg curry instead, because you've got too many of them, and you need to do something with them. So yeah, my favorite actually. Mom used to make really good egg curry. And she's nodding along too.
Yeah, I see her smiling.
And the other thing we used to do a lot of, and this is completely off topic, but I'll share anyway, is sardine curry. So sardine is something that people typically think of as Spanish, but in Malaysia, sardine curry it just became one of those things. It's like if you've got nothing in the fridge, but you've got some curry powder, and you got some potatoes and no meat, you just take sardines and you take out the bones and you whip up some sardine curry, and it's so good. It's just got, and you add a lot of curry leaves and lime to it to kind of offset this pungency of the sardine. It totally works. And then coconut milk at the end. So good.
Wow. Yeah, I don't really like sardines, but the way you described it sounds really, really
yeah. Makes it quite nice. Yeah.
Yeah. I know what are they in? Are they in this might be a question for Ploy if she's still here.
Yeah.
Is it ever in any pad thai? I don't know if she's still here.
I'm here.
Yes.
Yay.
I'm
To the
cooking.
rescue.
Yes. What's the question?
Oh, is sardines ever used in pad thai? Have you heard of that, or any Thai dishes? Like
Sardine?
Yeah, like a type of fish. Maybe I guess
We
fish
do,
sauce,
but
right?
but I need to think because I
Yeah.
usually don't use it here, but we usually do
Yeah.
because it's
Thailand.
almost like fish sauce. It's almost like
Yeah.
umami,
Yes.
but I need to think.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Because I think if you talk about fish sauce as well, boy, I know in Vietnam they have different types of fish sauce depending on northern Vietnam versus southern Vietnam. And they use different type of fish. But typically there's always either anchovy or sardine in it, because it's really got that umami flavor.
But we don't use sardine in pad thai for sure.
Yeah, doesn't go in, it's in the fish sauce. Is that right, Ploy?
Yes, we use the fish sauce instead of sardine.
What were you thinking of, Julia, in terms of sardine? Was it more of a dish, or was it, because in Malaysia, like we will do sardine puffs. Like it'll be pastry mixed in with, like stuffed with sardine and usually a curry flavor. And it's so good. It makes me want to cry. It's so good.
Wow. Sounds amazing. Okay, I don't remember. I'm meant to be having a food amnesia moment, but I will research.
That's something to try out. So I'm just going to do shredded omelet. So you do the same thing with the bean curd sheets if you had it, and so if it's fresh, you'd go ahead and roll it and just slice it up. If it was dried, you'd rehydrate them. There's actually a video I've done for that as well on my YouTube channel, if you want to check it out in terms of how to make vegan shredded omelet. But this is actually fried before you slice it up, and it's cool to the touch, so I can go ahead and slice. Whereas if you were using the bean curd sheets, you'd slice it up, then you'd cook it. So you'd actually get that shredded texture, and then you just kind of saute it with a little bit of oil, and it works really nicely for an egg substitute. So yeah, I was saying to Mom the other day, I made it and I ate it for breakfast because it was so good. Just soy sauce and chili, just so good. Bean curd's pretty, and I think I had soaked it in mushroom stock, so that mushroom flavor was there, and it just made it so delicious to eat with some chili and soy sauce. But yeah, it's actually really great.
And we just put the links that you just mentioned into chat for your YouTube channel.
Awesome. Yeah. There's also, as I mentioned before, the sambal condiment that I showed you guys. That's also on there as an option to make if you'd like to try. Sorry, I keep disappearing into my walk-in pantry to grab things. I just need a little container to put all the eggs in. And that's ready to go as a topping. Now this is ready to go as well. I've just got water in here. I'm going to put a smidge of salt just to give it a bit of flavor. We're talking half a teaspoon. And then we're just going to blanch the bean curd. So I'm going to switch back kind of like a sieve, and boiling water in there. We're blanching the bean sprouts for no more than 15 to 20 seconds. Like they're already, you can have them raw, like with pho, you'd have bean sprouts raw, but they're store-bought. So I like to just give it a quick blanch. And then that way, yeah, you know, any impurities come out, and it kind of has that cooked taste as well. All right. And that's about it for cooking, guys. I think we're ready to plate after this. How's everyone going? Are we almost at the end of it as well? I've also got my noodles, which I called out before, so hopefully you guys haven't forgotten about that.
Could you do the bean sprouts and the bok choy together?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just that the bok choy, I would recommend the bean sprout can go with the leaves, but the bok choy, maybe the stems leave in slightly longer. Just maybe an extra 5 or 10 seconds, because they're harder, yeah. But they've got a good crunch to it, so. And there we go. So I'm gonna get rid of this pot, and then we can move over to plating. Actually, I'll just bring my broth back so we can take a look at it and finish it up with the sugar and the coconut milk. So let me get rid of this guy. So he's been simmering now for about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. But as I said, you can keep topping up water and keep simmering it for as long as you'd like. It does improve in terms of the flavor and the texture. So just going to go in with, so it's just 250 mils or 1 cup. Yeah, 1 cup of coconut milk. And again, milk, not cream, because we want it light. And then I'll add some palm sugar and some salt if I need to. So that is half a cup and another half a cup. And that should be good. And I'm dropping the heat down now. As soon as I add the milk, coconut milk, I just want it to warm through. I don't want it to cook because it's just going to add to the final sort of touch to the dish. I'm just going to give it a quick taste and then decide how much sugar and salt needs to go in.
And yes, Rosh does her own classes. We're so fortunate that she teams up with us once a month. Where else do you do your classes? With the library in
Central Coast Library, so in New South Wales. This is palm sugar. I'm sure you've seen it before. It's the block, so you can't kind of just throw the whole thing in, although that would be fun. So this is the cheese grater. I'm just gonna shave some off. A tablespoon's worth probably is what you want, but it really depends on your taste. Now this broth is really creamy and a little salty, so I think just a hint of sweetness is gonna be perfect, and then the lime can cut through all of that when I serve it up. So I'm just gonna go in with a little bit of this. Now, if you don't have palm sugar, all good. You can use raw sugar. If you're in an Indian household, you can use jaggery, which is another type of palm sugar. It basically comes from the different, it comes from sugar cane, I believe, whereas this comes from sugar palm, although I'm looking at mom and mom is nodding. Yes, she's nodding. Okay, I have her approval. But they come from the sap of the tree. So it gives a little bit of sweetness, but then also has a little bit of flavor, which is why it's better than table sugar.
Wait, say the sugar again. What kind?
The sugar?
It's coconut?
Palm sugar. So it comes from the coconut palm tree. So there's so many different variations. Yeah.
You're making it like live?
No. No, I bought it. So I did not make it. I bought it. Here, let me show you. So that would be awesome if I made it. So this is it. This is this way around. Palm sugar. It says Gula Melaka. Melaka is the place in Malaysia where this type of sugar is made. And it just comes in a block like so. And then you shave it. You can get it granulated. But it's typically used for desserts, cooking like laksa and other things. And it basically comes from, so palm, it comes from the sap of a palm tree that then gets cooked into sugar. And then they basically pour them into these little molds and they become these little blocks. And then you get to shave them. That's what they are. Does that answer the question?
And Sandra and I are both wondering, how do you store that, like in a Tupperware, it looks like?
Tupperware is fine, yeah. It has a pretty long shelf life.
Americans in this class, I challenge us to all find this in a store near you because I have never seen it and I'm so excited.
No, it's great.
In the Indian stores, we get this, the equivalent
Jaggery.
she's talking about, jaggery powder.
Yes.
Oh, nice. Okay,
And
so ethnic.
I don't buy the block anymore.
Yeah,
I
it's
go
easier.
for-
Otherwise, you have to grate. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I have jaggery in powder form as well, but I've ended up getting these in blocks. But yeah, so it's the same thing. It's a different type of sugar, different. So that comes from a coconut sugar cane, I think. Mom's still nodding. Mom's nodding. Yes, so I'm good. Comes from sugar cane. Oh, so good. That is so good. I wish you guys could taste that. But it's sweet and salty and spicy and creamy all at the same time. So sugar cane is what jaggery is made of, whereas this is palm sugar. But all sugar, all natural sugars, disaccharides if you like, because they're more complex, and they've also got flavor because they come from a tree as opposed to pure sugar cane. But yeah, so that's ready. How's everyone else going? Are we ready to plate as well together, or? I have 4 blocks in a bag. Yes, Thomas, if you were referring to this guy, this is 2 blocks in this box, if that's what you're referring to, hopefully. Tell me if it wasn't. But yeah, that's our Sarawak Laksa, guys. I'm gonna have this guy on the side. I'm gonna put him down if I can, and get everything else ready to go so we can plate.
And everyone else who might be cooking along, once Rush shows us how to plate properly, we will then invite you to spotlight and show us how it's going. We can't wait to see.
Yes, I'm excited. It should be fun to see everyone's rendition of it. There's I don't think there's no one way to make this. There's like a million ways to make it, and you can never get it wrong. So, all right. Yeah, we go with this. So first up is going to be, I'm going to hang out here because I think this is where the camera is. Just going to kind of rotate everything around it. So I'm just going to go in with some noodles. So again, vermicelli if you had it. This one's a little bit different. It's got a little bit more, as you can see, it's like voluminous hair. The type you like when you have good healthy hair. That's the sort of noodles we want. So I'm just going to go and put it in so that it's nice and in the center, not too much of it. And I can't stress this enough. This dish is rich. you do not, maybe you can, depending on the type of appetite you have, but typically you would have this in a small bowl. You would have multiple portions in small bowls as opposed to one big bowl, just to make sure you kind of don't get ahead of yourself, because it can be quite filling. So here are all my trimmings. That's the chicken. Oh, I'll keep it in the camera. That's the egg. And then that's the bean sprouts. And we've got the prawn. And we've got the cucumber. And then I'm just going to get my garnish plate as well and put him here, where we've got some coriander, some lime, some chili, all that jazz. All right. So what I typically do is I put probably more the chicken and the prawn. I don't want everything sort of getting stained by the soup, if you like. I don't mind if the chicken and prawn gets stained a little bit. But yeah, just some chicken on the side. And so we'll kind of keep going with everything all around. I will do the prawn actually at the end, now that I think about it. It's difficult today. But we're just going to go in with some broth. And that's just going to go right on top. I'm going to do another spoon. One more. There it is. Okay. Leave that to sit. Now I'm in with everything else. A little bit of shredded omelet. Over here. A little bit of bean shoot over here. A little bit of cucumber over here. More. Now I am going to sit this soup spoon over here and do a little bit of laksa on it, the traditional way. It usually is served in a separate spoon or bowl, but I'm just going to go ahead and put it in the spoon and have him sit there. Now this lime is cut interestingly. I'm not sure if you guys know, it's cut against the grain. So if you take a typical, if I can find one. There we go, got one. So there's a reason the lime's cut like this. First of all, it's you take it, so that's the top of the lime and that's the bottom. So you would cut that part off, then you would sit it on the part that you've cut off, and then you'd slice it this way. And that's how you get that sliced off at the bottom. I might actually show you guys if it's helpful, let me know. But basically what it does is you get the lime along the grains, which means when you squeeze it, what ends up happening is it goes along the grains as it pours in, and this becomes like a little snout for it to drop in. So there's a reason it's cut like that, in case you didn't know. But yeah, if anyone wants to see how I cut the lime so that it looks like this, let me know. But this guy is just gonna sit over here to go with that. And we're gonna put some prawns in the middle, like so. Big ginormous one, like that. And then we're just gonna go with some, can't do it without coriander, so coriander has to go at the top in the middle. It's iconically Sarawak Laksa. Put that there, and some chilies. And that should take care of it. One there, and one there. There you go, Sarawak Laksa. Put him here, and I will lift him up so you guys can take a closer look.
That is so beautiful. Oh my goodness.
See, now I'm excited to see what everyone else has.
Yeah, but wow. This is always the part of the class, Ruby, can you confirm this, where we're like, oh, we wish we were all together.
Yes, or we at least need smell-o-vision of some sort, that we can smell it if we can't eat it.
I feel like Zoom should do that as an April Fool's joke, but everybody would get kind of mad actually because they want it to happen.
That is true. How's everyone else going? So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you very soon.